Let's talk about open source maintainers because they are the people who are the pillars of open source communities. They have a lot of responsibilities, and often, or at least sometimes, they don't have a lot of help. And very, very often, very, very sadly, they are also the people who aren't necessarily paid to do the maintenance work in the open source project because companies and organizations very often are, let's say, happy to pay people to submit features, feature implementations, as well as bug fixes that are important for the company to be merged and fixed. When it comes to the maintenance work on an open source project, things like ensuring that there are people who are doing code reviews, ensuring backwards compatibility for the APIs, fixing vulnerabilities, and also maintaining a vulnerability process, not just providing the fixes. And this is a lot of responsibility and work. And if you're not paid to do it, many people often fall into the habit of doing it on the side in their free time. But you only get so much free time. And then eventually you just get exhausted and burned out. And that's when the community around these maintainers, if they are overloaded and stretched too thin, start to crumble. No one wants that. So, what can we do? Open source maintainers and project teams, they can say no. Sometimes project maintainers need to draw some boundaries and also guide people how they can help to take on responsibilities and share the burden that the project maintainers have in the project. Another important aspect to think about is that having communities around open source projects, it's not a given. It is work. I have a segment for you with Kelsey Hightower where he talks about all this in a bit more detail.
I think the tricky part is that, and I always get in trouble when I mention this, especially like online, the community and all that other stuff is bonus. Open source to me literally is my source code under an appropriate license shared with you. That's it. I might even disable issues and pull requests. It's still an open source project. It may not have a community, but it's still an open source project. And honestly, I would rather someone who doesn't have bandwidth for all the other things still share. You know what I mean? Like if you cure cancer and you want to give people the data and the program that proves it, please share it. And then we can go validate whether that works or not. I'd rather have that than someone say, well, you don't have a community and it shouldn't exist. Like, that's bonus. Because I think the ability to say no is so important. Everyone's like, no, 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 this is a community. You should take my changes. It's like, that's not honest. You're not being very honest because it's not take your contribution, it's to be responsible forever of your contribution. We like curated things. I like to hear a song by a specific artist. They shouldn't take everyone's lyrics. I want to hear their lyrics. When I go buy a particular food item, it's from a particular restaurant. They're opinionated, right? And they curate their menu and their ingredients, and it tastes a certain way. It's not designed by committee. And I think this is where a lot of things get into trouble. Look, some things benefit from committee, like HTTP 3. Yeah, the whole internet's going to have to use it. Then you're probably going to have to get some input from a lot of the stakeholders involved. No problem. But when you start talking to a solo maintainer and say, hey, you need to get more people reviewing this stuff. There's a timeline. Where's the stickers? Where's the swag? I want to contribute. I want to rewrite your project in Rust. It's like, I am under no obligation to do that because the responsibility is overwhelming for that. So we need way more empathy too. So look, if you want to have a community, and you want to do all these community things, state your governance model, state your contribution guidelines, communicate when those things need to change, and then have at it. But I've been on the other side of that where if you're a company like Google having to pay 100 engineers to work on an open source project, it's really hard to have them reviewing the rest of the world's code forever and then deal with the political consequences of taking on this thing versus that one thing because decisions need to get made. And look, this stuff gets into humanity real quick. It starts becoming a government. Here's how we vote. Sometimes there's a benevolent dictator who understands more of the system than everyone else. And they say no because they can see what you can't see. And it's really hard to accept their decision because you feel like it's our project. And it ain't our project. There's a project that's typically being maintained by a group of maintainers, and they got to make a decision of what's best for everyone, including the maintainability of it. And look, remember, there's always that release valve. If you truly believe what you believe, there's that button. You can totally click it, and you can add these features there and then plead your case by getting some adoption in the wild, really proving out that this thing needs to be there. So yeah, that's part of it. But I do think these are separate things. Communities are an additive to open source. Some of the best open source projects have some of the best communities, but it ain't a requirement.
I love this segment with Kelsey because it highlights all the aspects of the open source ecosystem that we very often just take for granted. Like having an open source project and a community around it, especially for companies and corporate organizations, very often they look at it as the community itself was another company with all the responsibilities that come with maintaining and develop that particular open source project further that they look after and maintain. It is very easy to see yourself as an entity outside of that community. And since the code and artifacts are available under an open source license, you just grab them and use them. But if there is a problem with that code base, that is the community's responsibility, right? Like I don't have to do anything about that. Up until today, this was mostly working. However,